Thank you, Chair, and thank you for those opening remarks because they echo, I think, my first few days in post. I'd just like to speak briefly before we go to questions as an opening, firstly to recent events and also to give people a sense of what it's felt like for me coming actually into the organisation, which I know very well because of the time I've already spent here. But to reassure you and reassure the public and everybody with regards to the excellence that I've seen from the rank and file officers. And I've been out a lot speaking to people at all levels. I think the communities in Northern Ireland should be very proud of the commitment and the professionalism of the PSNI. We have begun to stabilise even in recent days because of recent events that have caused, I think, a lot of uncertainty and challenge for the organisation, and given reassurance and support to those hard-working staff. But I've had nothing but positive experiences in speaking to people. There's a lot of rhetoric about low morale, and I'm sure there are concerns about morale, and some of that is justified. But the experiences I've had with the officers and the staff has been very positive. They've been very pleased to see me, and what they've told me about what they're doing is exemplary. There are obviously numerous exceptional policing operations going on at the moment, some of which the public see, a number of which that I've looked at closely in the last few days go unseen. But they all demonstrate the strength and versatility of this organisation in keeping communities safe in what is a unique policing environment and a dangerous environment all too often still. There are several key issues that need to be addressed regarding the organisation moving forward, and I do recognise that. Not least of which is the need to secure a strong financial position, which you've referred to, Chair, for the remainder of this financial year, but also going into next year, into the next financial year, to give a platform that guarantees officer numbers and staff numbers so that we continue to deliver the service the people of Northern Ireland deserve and need. I don't have to pitch the importance of numbers and funding to this board. People say less police means less policing. That can certainly be the case. There are things we can do to help ourselves, but I want to thank the board for their support around the funding issue so far. We need to drive that, though, home to everybody, especially those who are going to make the decisions about our funding going forward. As I've said, there are things, though, that we can do that I've already seen to make ourselves more efficient and make sure that our resources are aligned to our priorities. I'm already looking at what we can do around that. We need to show that we have the leverage with our resources in the right place, and that resource that we do have is working to the aims of the organisation. I want to emphasise that we'll not always get things right. I'm going to talk about that a little bit this morning. One particular example from recent days. But when we do get something wrong, we'll correct it and we will put it right. Being a police officer today is harder than I think it's ever been for all sorts of different reasons. And we do need to reset the blame culture button that seems to exist in policing generally. That doesn't, by the way, as some people sometimes suggest, conflict in any way with the high standards that I expect from all my officers and staff. But we need a learning culture, not a blame culture. The last few days have been particularly humbling to see what people are doing and the hard work that every day is being done to support and look after the communities in Northern Ireland. And it is a privilege to be in this role. I want to speak briefly about things that have happened in the first few days and weeks that I've been here. So firstly, Chris, to my right, has been appointed as the sort of interim temporary Deputy Chief Constable. That was necessary for all sorts of logistical, legal and technical reasons around what we are encountering in the organisation, and Chris has already got quite an interesting in-tray. I also want to talk about the HMIC report. Now, overall, and I've seen a lot of HMIC reports, it was a really quite a reasonable report and a fair report. But it does signpost things that give us an understanding of the sorts of pressures this organisation is going to be under if we don't firstly help ourselves around our resources and leveraging them in the right way, but also if we don't get the funding that the organisation needs rather than the cuts that we're currently facing. And in the report, and I will quote because it's important that we start to lobby strongly for this, the report states we acknowledge that the decrease in officer numbers is likely to have consequences, including 1. A significant reduction in neighbourhood policing patrol hours, meaning less visibility, problem-solving activity, engagement and reassurance of communities. Secondly, a reduced number of detectives and less experienced detectives. This will limit capacity for the development of intelligence and proactive investigation of terrorism, organised crime and high harm offences such as rape, sexual assault and domestic abuse. And finally, fewer specialist uniformed support officers will mean reduced capacity for proactive search operations, specialist resource deployment and less resilience to deal with significant public disorder that often, as we know, can occur in this place. I know Lee Freeman very well, the HMI. He was a chief constable with me. I have a huge amount of respect for him. I will not ignore, and nor should any of us ignore his comments, and I agree with everything that he said. There's a considerable amount of work to do to stop these consequences from occurring, some of which, as I've explained, we can mitigate, but we need the help of everybody to address the issues that we can't mitigate unless we get sufficient funding. Briefly, I want to mention Myologic. Now, we've already announced that we attended a property on Saturday the 23rd of September following a report of a domestic incident. This is now a live investigation, and the position is that I can't comment any further on it. I brought in West Midlands Police, having spoke to the Chief Constable there, to provide independence around the assessment of what we've already done and any further inquiries that needed to be conducted. I think it's helpful for everybody to know that I anticipate a resolution of that matter to be in weeks rather than months, because that's in the interests of everybody involved. We've got to give West Midlands, though, the time to do that job, and I won't be commentating any further on that. I also want to mention the face coverings that occurred recently at the criminal trial in Belfast. When I saw those images, I was extremely frustrated, and I know they presented uncomfortable viewing for everybody. But immediately steps were taken to ensure no further such incidents occurred. A PSNI debrief has taken place, and a joint one is now going to take place with the court service to identify any learning. I want to be very clear. I will not tolerate such acts of intimidation from anyone. They have no place in society. I spoke to the officer in charge. Immediately I became aware, and I was delighted that matters were remedied straight away. Operation Tarlac, the events in Israel and Gaza. We're continuing to see steady protests, and parading activity related to the Middle East conflict. To date, we have not seen the issues related to extremism that have appeared elsewhere in the UK. I have made personal contact with both the Jewish and Muslim communities with regards to those protests. We have got an extremely experienced commander in charge of that activity and a well-rehearsed plan to deal with that protest that so far, with the engagement taking place by our officers and staff, has worked outstandingly well. I was also part of a meeting with other senior chief constables last week with regards to the National Counter-Terrorism Coordination Committee that oversees national security. So we are plugged in to everything that's happening with regards to those events, and I'm very alive to some of the legal challenges that have existed for the Metropolitan Police, and we are making sure that we are very much conscious of where the line sits with regards to criminality. Regarding the Kenova report, I've already made my position on this clear, but I've handed over responsibility of the Kenova report to the interim Deputy Chief Constable, Chris Todd, beside me to my right. It's his responsibility now to manage that report through the PSNI Strategic Board. I've also met with Sir Ian Livingston this week with regards to his continuing activity now as the Officer in Overall Command of Kenova. So my responsibility for that has finished. It finished when I handed that report to the PSNI before I was confirmed in this role. I'll not have any part in the internal process with regards to the final phase that report has to go through. That phase is described in a protocol that is on the Kenova website. That protocol sets out that report has to firstly go through a representations or maximalisation process, which it underwent quite properly earlier this year. It then went through national security checking. That is conducted with the Cabinet Office and all the constituent parts of the security infrastructure who might have concerns about contents of such report, and it passed through that process. And it then went to the Director of Public Prosecutions for the phase that effectively establishes that there's no criminal justice prejudice in the report so that it can be published. The final element of the report, where I, as the OIOC of Kenova in my previous role, hand over that report to the PSNI has occurred. And I recuse myself now of any involvement in that report. The independence of Kenova and what I built in that investigative structure for the families and the stakeholders, I am absolutely alive to, and I will not compromise that in any way. So that report will now go through the due process that already exists within the PSNI to deal with reports of that nature. The Judicial Review 168, the Ormar Road issue, many of you will obviously be aware, if not all, of my decision, and it's been widely reported, with regards to not taking any further action with regards to that matter, as regards any appeal to the suspension or relocation of the officers and the determination made by Judge Schofield, which I read in forensic detail along with other documents, and I agreed with the court's position. I'm now working towards resolving the second element of that issue, which is the conduct of the officers at the time. I'm not saying anything more about that at the moment because I intend to resolve that in the coming weeks, and I'll report fully to the board at the next meeting. But fair to say, I think, that there was lessons learned for everybody in that particular incident, not least of which the broader organisation. And that's what I think we need to focus on. I'm delighted by the completion of the Wardside Custody Suite, and I know the board went there on Thursday the 19th of October, and I've had feedback from various people about how well that went. I'm looking forward to that custody suite getting open. There seems to be a bit of last minute snagging around health and safety, so the date seems to have moved again, but we'll soon resolve that, and Ryan might be able to speak more to that shortly. I just want to mention the search operation in South Armagh, which I was alive to as things were developing live time. Officers from the Serious Crime Branch have recovered a number of weapons, which I'm sure you're now aware, and ammunition during a search operation in Crossmaglen earlier this week. A proactive search took place in the Monnog Road area on Monday, where a significant weapons hide was discovered in this rural area. An example again of the great work that's being done, often unseen, to keep people safe. Inside were a number of suspected firearms, including 2 shotguns, 7 handguns, 3 revolvers and an assault rifle, as well as a significant amount of ammunition. All of those items will now be subjected to forensic examination. These searches send a clear message to those involved, in organised criminal activity, that we will continue to target them and disrupt their activities so that communities can live a safe and peaceful life without fear. Now, Chair, together with my team, I'm happy to take any questions.